worked here. I worked over at the new. I'm here with Dr. Ivan Eland, and he's the author of this new book, War and the Rogue Presidency, Restoring the Republic After Congressional Failure. So why did you write this book? What was the premise behind your endeavor to write this book?
Well, executive power has increased over the centuries, really, but mainly in the 20th century and now into the 21st century because of war. And when we got into wars, it led to the expanding executive. And now we have executive wars, which complete the feedback loop. So we have more wars because the expansive presidency is fighting them. And Congress has abdicated a lot of its power to the president in the post World War II era and continuing through the war on terror and that sort of thing.
Why is the war issue not more pressing in the public's consciousness? When it comes to politics, it seems like it reached a really high pitch during the Bush years, 04, 05, 06. There was a repudiation of the Iraq War. The media was really big on turning against that war after they cheerled its arrival, right? They kind of switched over and kind of used it as a bludgeon to go after the Bush administration singularly, while kind of leaving the Democrats who voted for it off the hook as much. But ever since then, Obama rode on that anti-war sentiment, and then of course he flipped. And now Trump, came in and said the Bush's wars were stupid. They're a lie. He said we went to Iraq on a lie. He said that in South Carolina, where there's a lot of military bases and military support there, in a Republican primary in front of to Jeb Bush, and then he didn't quite fulfill that yet. As his term has unfolded, he hasn't got us into a new intervention fully, but he's perpetuated the ones that we were already in.
Yes, he's actually accelerated some of them, including the Afghan war. If he withdraws the troops that he says he's going to withdraw, he'll be back to Obama level.
Oh, wow.
But then there'll still be 8,600 troops there, and so I think he may have good intentions on that, but things keep getting in the way of him getting out. So, and of course, Obama went back into Iraq, and he's continued that one, and then he's continued the wars in Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Niger, etc. So, and we don't know how many of these wars are going on because, which is really shocking, because Congress is supposed to really approve of these wars. Any military action under the Constitution, the original conception of the Constitution, but we don't really follow that anymore, and we have unilateral executive war. And that's what the book is about. How do we stop this? Because we have wars that are going on that nobody even knows about, a lot more than likely, and only the president and some of the security bureaucracies know they're going on. And you say, well, those are just little wars, but throughout history, we've had covert action, which led to a larger war. The Bay of Pigs invasion by the CIA, sponsoring Cuban exiles, ultimately led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost incinerated the planet. And then shortly after that, and that was under John F. Kennedy, shortly after that, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, his successor, they had covert raids against the North Vietnamese coast, and that led to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where our destroyers were allegedly attacked, which is a little suspect now. But of course, that was the incident that the North Vietnamese attack on the destroyers, never mentioning these covert action against the North Vietnamese coast, which the attack on our destroyers was a response to. Of course, LBJ accelerated and escalated the war up to 500,000 Americans in Vietnam, and of course that was a war that not only was lost overseas, killed 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese, but of course it also racked our home front, where there were massive protests and violence and everything else right here at home.
And so it seems like whoever we elect, we get the same thing. I put it this way, the left, they'll promise Karl Marx a little bit sometimes, and then when they get elected, they give us John Maynard Keynes, and then the right will promise the promises of Milton Friedman and Hayek, and then we get John Maynard Keynes, and that same way goes for war. They both take their turns on winning elections based on having a humble foreign policy like George W. Bush, and then he goes to war. Obama gets elected. It's time to end these wars, and then he goes to war. Trump says, I'm tired of the wars, and then he goes to war. They win on peace. They govern on warfare. They govern on the perpetuation and killing and starvation of millions of people. And it seems as if our democracy really is not a democracy. That's kind of like in name only at this point.
Yes, and on our two biggest wars, World War I and World War II, both Wilson in World War I and FDR in World War II, they famously said, we're not going to war or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after they got elected, that's precisely what we did in both cases. So yes, they run on peace because peace is popular, but then they either get sucked into wars or they think that there's something that we need to do, and so they build up the public to do that. And the war is popular until it lasts too long or too many people get killed and there's no real security rationale, or there never was one. Then that's when wars get unpopular, and of course that can lead to the end of presidencies such as Lyndon Johnson during the Vietnam War. And of course Woodrow Wilson lost the Congress when he had, just after he won the war. Our side was winning in World War I. He lost the Congress because everyone was so sick of the bloodbath. So, you can lose elections when you do this. In Britain, Churchill lost the election after World War II, after they defeated the Nazis. So people get tired of war even when they're winning sometimes.
But see, the politicians and politics functions as a misdirection. It functions as a way to channel the ire of the public about these bad behaviors and bad policies and things that make us repulsed. And so they say, I'm going to punish this policy and scapegoat them, cast them out of our government. And they get that cathartic feeling if their side's the winning side. We beat Trump, or we beat Bush, or beat whoever it is they're trying to beat. But nothing ever changes. So it is a scapegoat misdirection mechanism. I'm not saying it's designed to be that way, but that's what it functions as. So that's, you hire these politicians, they take on the ire. They're like vessels of wrath of the public. They're vessels of adoration, and then they become vessels of wrath. And meanwhile, the steady state of things continues uninterrupted. So it's like you watch your wrestling game, and then everything is still going.
Or the third possibility is they're trying to distract from something, because they've done studies that show that presidents who are trying to get reelected in a reelection year, and if the economy weakens, they want to take the public's attention off that. So they go overseas. They're more than twice as likely to start a war or be involved in a war if they're trying to get reelected and the economy's gone south as they are under normal circumstances. So,
well, nothing unifies us more than a common enemy.
Right, exactly. It's particularly if there's other things that you want to distract attention from. Right. And oftentimes there is the things that particularly bad economy.
I mean, it seems like all these wars, most of them have started under dubious circumstances. I'm thinking back of the sinking of the Maine. That was under dubious circumstances, wasn't it?
Yes,
that's the Spanish-American War.
And the leading naval officer at the time in Cuba, we had a ship called the Maine, named after the state, a battleship that was down there visiting, and it blew up. And the chief naval officer at the time said, "I think this is an accident." Yeah. Well, newspapers started running with it, and all of a sudden, we're at war with Cuba. And just a few years ago, they developed conclusive evidence that the guy on the scene at the time was right. It was an accident. The boiler just blew up. It wasn't some sabotage on the part of the Spanish or anything, which is what they said to go to war. So yes, the Mexican War started that. Even the Civil War started under questionable circumstances, and certainly the War of 1812 did. World War I did.
Lusitania,
well.
right?
Yes,
They put military equipment, right, and then they put human civilians, right, on the same ship, and then they went into their waters.
Well, Woodrow Wilson defended the right of Americans to ride on belligerent country ships carrying munitions through a war zone, and some of these ships were even armed. And his Secretary of State said, "Well, why should Americans who are doing that object if a few people get killed because we're sticking up for starving an entire country because the British were launching a hunger blockade against the Germans, and Wilson wasn't complaining about that. He was complaining about Americans who are riding on these belligerent ships with munitions in the hull, which of course transporting munitions like the Lusitania did, and they were in the war zone around Britain. So I mean, it was kind of fake neutrality on the part of the U.S. and that of course we got pulled into the war because we weren't really truly neutral.
So there seems to be this need for the myth to work. That you have to let the bad guys seemingly punch first, and then that justifies this all-out campaign of slaughter and starvation.
Well, yes, throughout our history,
they have to punch first. You know, they get it right up in their face and then spit or whatever. And then they, all right, you punch now. I get to destroy you and all your friends.
Yes,
you know?
This has happened multiple times in our wars.
Wasn't FDR with the?
Yes, before Pearl Harbor, he was helping the British sink German U-boats in the Atlantic.
And I know it's considered like taboo, but isn't there evidence that they kind of knew the Japanese were coming to attack us, or is that a conspiracy?
Well,
I've heard that
they knew that the Japanese were likely to attack because we were trying to strangle them with economic sanctions. Right. What they messed up was they didn't think that they thought it was going to be a sabotage attack with using people coming off of a mini-sub. So they put all the planes at Pearl Harbor together, and of course they should have dispersed them, but they didn't think that Japanese...
I thought they were trying to get rid of their old stock and get in new equipment, so they needed to get it all liquidated.
Well,
they
just didn't... They knew that they were going to be hit, but they thought it was going to be at the Philippines, which it was, but they also, the Japanese surprised them and were able to...
You know, like you got a car dealership, you got some late model cars in the lot that haven't sold in a long time, you got to liquidate them, you got to pull them out in front of the hurricane as it comes. And,
yeah.
All right, guys, you got new equipment. We need new cars.
Yes, well, they certainly, but we haven't been very good over time actually defending our country. War of 1812, Pancho Villa raid, Mexican bandit raid, and also Pearl Harbor, we blew that one. Yeah. Eventually, we may get it right. 9/11. On 9/11, the fighters went out to sea, and so eventually we may get some retribution, like in World War II.
So this is a private company that's supposed to provide a service to us, right? To prevent attackers. They sure have done a pretty bad job.
Well, the military has the cult of the offensive, which is more, they want to take the war to the enemy, and in certain conditions, that's a good strategy, but it's not necessarily a good strategy if you're trying to be a defensive republic. If you're trying to be a globe-girdling empire, that may be a viable strategy. But the problem is when you get attacked, that they're not used to having to defend the territory of the United States. And so.
Now, what about the Korean War? Was there an inciting incident they used for that? I don't remember.
No, I mean, they had said that Korea was outside our defense perimeter because it was so close to Russia. They figured it after the World War II that South Korea would come under the influence of the USSR. So they wrote it off, and they even made a speech. The Secretary of State made a speech saying, "Well, this is outside our defense perimeter." Well, Stalin and the North Koreans said, "Oh, well, in that case, we'll take it." So they invaded. So there was a legitimate invasion, but of course. You should either try to deter, say this is important to us, we're going to fight if you do this, or when you write it off, you should write it off. And of course, they sent troops there immediately because even though they had said this is outside their defense perimeter. So, and the same thing happened in the Persian Gulf War with Saddam Hussein. They had said, well, we don't get involved in inter-Arab territorial disputes because Saddam was saying he was mad at Kuwait because Kuwait had not, he had fought Iran and he thought Kuwait should be compensating him for that. And so he was arguing with them. So we said, well, we don't get involved in inter-Arab territorial disputes. And he interpreted that as a green light to invade Kuwait. Then after he did, of course, we sent hundreds of thousands of troops over there, and we eventually evicted them from Kuwait. But you have to decide.
There was the babies and incubators incident. That turned out dubious, right?
Right. Well, you have to
ripping babies out of incubators. That's what was sold on us.
Yes, there's all sorts of wild accusations.
So they always have to. That's the pattern. They have to get a wild accusation, and they have to insinuate that we didn't punch first in order for them to create their mythology that triggers the submission of the population to go along with the war.
Right, right.
It always starts that same pattern over and over again. I mean, like with Syria, they tried to do that with the chemical gas attacks, which again, there's a lot of evidence that we don't really know who all was doing all of that. They just reported, was the United Nations reported something about it's unclear who was doing the sarin gas over there. They don't even know. It could have been ISIS. It sure would be a nice thing for Al Qaeda or ISIS to do to keep us staying over there. I mean, they did those attacks. He would, we'd signal, hey, we're leaving, and then the next day or whatever, it would be a few days later, boom, a sarin gas attack. Now, it doesn't make logical sense for Assad to do that. I don't know whether he did it or not. And the people that I've talked to from Syria say he's a horrible person.
He was doing it when at a certain point in time where it made no sense for him to do it. Now, whether he did it or not, it's unclear. But certainly, the people he was fighting against weren't very nice either. Right. So, but you have to say, well, are we going to go defend every use of chemical weapons?
I still understand how you can sell people on the idea that, hey, young man, young woman, I need you to put on uniform because the war on terror, which was started because Al Qaeda attacked us on our towers. We need you to join arms with the same side that is Al Qaeda to take out Assad in the same campaign. So you need to align yourselves functionally with the same group that knocked down those towers, those innocent human beings. You're going to join hand in hand to make sure we take out.
But this happens all the time. On the last day of World War II, we switched sides because we were fighting we were allied with the Soviets to fight the Germans and the Japanese, and then on the last day of World War II, and we went into the Cold War, we switched sides and reconstructed Japan and Germany to counter the Soviets. This is what nations do, I guess, when
they have this. It's not just a monster that needs to be destroyed from outside. There's also an argument, I believe, looking at a bigger picture, the anthropology of war, to look at how governments use war as a means of sacrificing soldiers to strengthen the internal transcendence of the nation's vision for their community. You see what I mean? That there's a quote from Hitler or someone like that said something like, "There's nothing more sweet and more noble than to give your life as a sacrifice for your nation." And that idea that nations have this need to sacrifice to kind of bind the community together. And they usually pick the poorest among folks today. It used to be war was fought by the nobles, the knights and stuff like that. And now it's almost like a lottery, like the Hunger Games, where it's people in the hinterlands and people in the poor communities that, hey, we've destroyed your economy because we've run this machine, this welfare machine. It's destroyed your economy, but hey, you can join an adventure. You can join an adventure and serve.
They sell it in various, with various excuses. But of course, this is why the founders, and I think this is a summary point here. This is why the founders put the declaration of war with the Congress, because it used to be kings would decide whether their countries went to war. They saw the European kings foist all these costs of blood and treasure on their common citizens, and they said, no, we don't want that. We want the representatives and the senators from states and representatives of the people to make these decisions.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, is human nature, I believe. And I don't know if a war will ever be something that humans will reject as a mechanism. I'm not sure. Wolves, when wolves fight over who's the alpha wolf, if the alpha defeats the other wolf, the beta wolf will submit its neck to the opponent. And the alpha wolf typically won't vanquish the foe. It'll restrain themselves. There's a dominant submission mechanism. But with humans, we escalate our violence. You kill my friend, I kill your family. Then you kill my whole village, and then I want to kill your nation for generations. That escalating reciprocal violence is something that seems to be unique to humans. You know,
Mhm.
animals, we don't know of them that intend genocide as revenge, but humans do that. What is it about the human, species as you've understood it that makes us do this unique thing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're certainly unique among the animal kingdom, I think, that does this. I mean, I guess we're at the top of the predation chart, so we have to be predators on ourselves, I guess. But it's really stupid because technology has increased the amount of people that we can feed and that sort of thing. And so why kill each other, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to do. And we're supposed to be thinking animals, whereas the lower animals are not so thinking, and so they're more limited in their ability to think and reason. A reason should take care of that, but it doesn't, unfortunately. People will still go to war for stupid reasons.
Well, your book is War in the Rogue Presidency, Restoring the Republic After Congressional Failure. And we highly recommend it. Check it out, read it, and continue to advance this topic because it's something that's essential. If we're going to have a sane society, we have to be able to exercise our addiction to war.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.